Well, good afternoon, everyone, in the chamber and at home, and welcome to this first meeting in the chamber in 2024. And being the first meeting, I would just like to wish everybody a Happy New Year. Those of you at home and those of you in the chamber, Happy New Year. I promise that's the last time I'll say this in here. I won't say that every meeting for the next couple of months. Apologies, we have an apology from Mayor Clark, who I'm certain will be watching this on live stream. We have an apology for Councillor Arnold, who is actually not on this committee, is he? So we have an apology for Councillor Kett, and I think it'd be appropriate, I'm sure councillors would wish me to offer condolences to Councillor Kett for the loss of Bernie a week ago. And we should have Darren on Zoom, but we don't.
He'll be joining us momentarily.
Okay. So Darren Ludlow, who normally chairs this committee, will join us on Zoom. And because it's impossible to chair a committee on Zoom, I'm going to do it today. So, declarations of interest. Do we have any? Oh, I'm sorry, receive the apology.
Correct.
Someone move that we receive the apologies. Okay, thanks, Grant and Evelyn. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest that they wish to declare in the agenda? Okay. Takes us to public forum. And we have Rodney Tribe here today, who's going to talk to us, I think, about Queen's Park. Welcome, Rodney. General Reserve, the reserves policy.
Yep.
And you know how this works, Rodney. You've got 10 minutes, which you can either fill with 10 minutes of talking, or you can speak for 5, and we'll ask questions for 5, or it's your choice.
All good. Is this working? Yep. Right. Well, many thanks for your time today. Obviously, I did submit on the General Reserves. Sorry, what do we want to call it? General Policies Reserves Management Plan. Whether it's a policy document or reserves management plan, I do not know. But I did. I did submit on it and say, please keep Argyll Park as it is, under its own management plan. So, having had a couple of back and forths with council, I thought I'd turn up today just to sort of clear the air a bit. So, in terms of the plan itself, reading through it, I don't know what are reserves, what aren't reserves, what are playgrounds that are reserves and aren't reserves. So I don't think you've been very clear in outlining what reserves are actually covered. There's no maps, no plans, yet every other council document has maps and plans. Even the old ones had maps and plans. And when I look at, how would I put it, there's actually papers out there that say what council or what an administrating body should be covering when they put a plan out. And it says the reserves covered by the plan and their boundaries must be sufficiently described for a member of the public to recognise them individually. Also says the plan must provide details of the classification of each reserve. Other council documents do. This one doesn't.
Yeah, right.
Right, there is nothing. But it has playgrounds, which are reserves. It calls things reserves, which aren't reserves. JG Ward is a prime example. So, yeah, confuses me. But back onto Argyll Park, I did raise the concern that removal of Argyll Park's own management plan sort of greys the waters a bit. So the Argyll Park management plan, obviously, it has objectives in it. One of those objectives is to allow for the provision and operation of a camping ground and bluff. Right? Under this new proposed one, it says camping is only allowed in campgrounds on a reserve. I do know that council have discussed potentially getting rid of the campground because it's non-strategic. It also includes a children's playground on that section. But more than that, when I read through the Argyle Park's current one, it says any tenanted buildings are to be maintained to a presentable standard of high quality for visitors to see. And that's right on the entrance to Bluff, well, on the way around the point. The new document removes that statement from anything. But then I get back into the lease. Now, I know officers put a comment on my submission that the long-term lease will transfer if that property is ever sold. I've challenged that with council, saying, well, how can that be? It's a reserve lease, and therefore if it loses reserve status, how does that continue? I have been told, well, there's nothing in the lease. It refers to Reserves Act, but occupation agreements are covered in the management plans, which talks about the Reserves Act. So it either is or it isn't. And I don't see how you can lease a reserve unless it's under the Reserves Act. But, so to me, I would rather you maintain Argyle Park's management plan, manage it under it. And if you want to revoke that status, we'll have that discussion later on too. But I'll get back to some of those others in terms of JG Ward Reserve. It's not a reserve. Part of it is, part of it's endowment land. Back in October 21, officers put a paper to the Bluff Community Board about selling Sewer Street, and part of that reserve, which is what we call the ditch in Bluff, beside the playground. And that paper talks about it not being a reserve, but being endowment land. It also suggested to the Bluff Community Board that the sale of that ditch in 36 Sewer Street could be used to upgrade the Bluff playground on Gore Street, which is basically no longer a playground, it's a bit of dirt, and reclassify the rest of the land to an actual reserve. Now, having read some other council papers, officers are proposing that council sell a lot of it. So I'm looking at going, is part of it going to become a reserve? Because the Bluff Community Board says, no, go away until you've talked to the community. Has this council actually spoken with the Bluff Community Board? I see nothing in any of these from them. So that's all I have to say. 7 minutes.
Thanks, Rodney. As always, a very well-researched piece of work. So thanks for those comments. We'll take questions. Could I ask you, you made a lot of points there. Do you want to summarise in a sentence what you are asking council to do?
Yep, what I'm asking council to do is put a line through Argyle Park on that back page. But I'm also asking council to actually put some maps in this plan, because community engagement in Invercargill is poor. It's lacking. But when you look at some of the documentation going out there for consultation, someone would look at that back page and go, oh, we've got a playground here that's going to be covered under this, but it's actually a reserve. Or we've got a playground that's not a reserve. How do you know what is and isn't a reserve?
Okay. So, okay, understood. Questions for Rodney? Yes, Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Rodney, I'm looking at Appendix 1, which lists 162
playgrounds and parks
and reserves, and the Waihopai Sports Association and various other. So it's that list you agree is comprehensive, but you would like the maps to go
but
with that.
That list doesn't tell me what are and aren't reserves. Like the Orange Street playground is actually a reserve. It's not a playground. There is a playground on a reserve. So it's actually got reserve status. There are some other playgrounds that are on land that don't have reserve status. So under the Reserves Act, there are different things that can and can't happen on that land.
So you would like more definition in that list,
Yeah.
that 6-page list?
That's what some of the guidance says, is to, the plan must provide details of the classification of each reserve. Your neighbourhood park strategy actually does that. But some of this actually overrides that, or that becomes obsolete. So in order for anyone to know, They actually have to go back through every single management plan that's currently in place to actually try and work it out. And who, apart from me, is going to sit there and dredge through that to get that information?
Good point.
Okay,
Thanks for that.
thanks, Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Rodney. Good to see you here again. I did see you lurking around the car park and thought, what's coming?
There we go.
So, no, good. Look, I agree around your point around the clarity with which we present information to public, particularly the point you've made around maps. And equally, I think what the point you're making is, you know, we've got to make policy in that as simple as we can for the layperson, because it's their policy. So I think they're two well-made points. In respect to Argyle Park, like my view, and I'm on the Bluff Community Board as the council rep, you know, it's a very strategic asset for that community.
But not according to papers that come to county.
Yeah, well,
I agree.
yeah. So, but where I think it's important is if we say it's a strategic asset in terms of what it could be, then how can we, or can we, under the current ownership model, for want of a better term, i.e. as a reserve, get the investment or make the investment that's needed to really turn it into a very strategic asset for the community. So, you know, I think, and in my mind, maybe a transition of ownership that would still remain community ownership, but in a different way that's not in a reserve, and allow investment into it, would really make a great asset for that community. So I'd be interested to understand if you think there's a way through moving it out of reserve land, but still retaining it in community asset, but in a way and shape of ownership that can enable investment into it to then make it a really, really strong strategic asset for that community around camping and, you know, keeping bed nights effectively in Bluff, which then leads to spend and those sorts of things.
Grant, could I suggest, because Rodney's going to respond, it's a big question and I suspect it requires a big answer, so maybe you guys can take it offline and talk about it, because that,
Okay.
Barry, you had a question?
Yeah, I just thanks for coming along, Rodney. As far as Argyle Park goes, I would like to see it that we could put camper vans on there, because there's nowhere in Bluff you can put camper vans.
there already in the campground.
Yeah.
There's a camping ground there, but there's all that spare space.
It's quality.
But there is opportunity to get the camping ground out, as there is a section on the other side which comes off where the centre is Tyler Street.
Pania,
So
can you
there is
use your mic?
Use your
Pania.
Anya.
Sorry, just in response to Councillor Stewart, there is a piece of land that sits at the end of the camping ground, which is off Tone Street, which, you know, could be developed. But I can understand, and thank you for coming, Rodney, in regards to Argyle Park, because it is a significant piece of land that community value.
And I know the medical centre value the piece that you're talking about, because they wouldn't want rebuilding.
Yeah, but if there was an extension, there is other alternatives rather than taking out the.
That's right, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
the
you.
main
Evelyn,
thing.
have you got a question?
Yes, I also appreciate the voice that speaks up for Argyle Park, because it's something very dear to my heart as well. But I think I'm more concerned that we shouldn't get too down in the weeds about whether a park can be a reserve or a playground or whatever, because in policies it actually says each reserve shall be assigned to an appropriate park management category. So this is a general policy. I take your point, Rodney, that it's not always easy to identify which ones are which, but when we're getting to talk about a particular place, then that's where the issue arises, and the JG Ward one has always been a bit murky of recent years.
Yeah, and that's where I get to it talks about it being a general reserves, general policies, but then it also says reserves management plan, and the management plan part comes under the Reserves Act, which covers all the reserves which don't have their own. So that's where I look at it and go, it is dealing with reserves.
So, Rodney, I mean, I think that you made that point already.
Yep.
I mean, you've made some really good points, and council certainly listened to it. We've actually all of the relevant officers here too, you know, who are doing that work and they're listening too. So, thanks very much for coming, as always, and for the research that you do.
Thank you.
Always valuable. Thank you. Okay, so if we can, do we have Darren online yet?
Not yet. Just checking to see if he's still planning to join us, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So we've got the minutes of the Community Wellbeing Committee meeting held on the 12th of December. Will somebody move that we receive those? Thanks, Trish, and seconded by Panya. Is there any discussion of those? Okay, will somebody, so all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. The next minutes are of the District Licensing Committee, and I might just leave them until Darren comes on. I know we can receive them pro forma, but if Darren's on, then we'll do it then. That takes us to the General Policies Reserve Management Plan on page 14. So, at the last meeting of this committee, we spent a lot of time actually going through this plan in a lot of detail, and we asked a lot of questions and we resolved a number of matters, but we inadvertently forgot to resolve to recommend it to council. So the point of bringing this paper back now is not to open it back up again. It's simply to resolve that simple matter. So unless Chris isn't here, but unless Rex, you want to open it up for any reason, then I think we'll just.
Well summed up and good recollection of what we didn't do.
Okay, Leslie.
I'll move that way,
Second.
Mr. Chair.
And
second.
Evelyn second. Are there any more discussion? And if not, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Takes us to the place strategy development on page 129 of board books. Is there somebody here to speak to that?
Damien?
I think so. So, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Ahiahi Mario Koto. Good afternoon, Chair and Councillors. I'm Dr. Damien Puddle, and I am pleased to be here at ICC as the Council's new play advocate. And today presenting the report on the development that's beginning on the ICC play strategy. Just to summarise the report with a couple of key points, Sport New Zealand has identified through international and national research that the benefits of play are significant and that they contribute to all four wellbeings for local government. However, they also recognise that children's right and opportunity to play is under threat in New Zealand, and that innovative approaches are necessary to ensure quality experiences throughout our cities now and in the future. And that is the reason why they're investing in local government and via the Local Play Advocate Workforce Program. A new strategy for play is necessary to respond to this need, and Invercargill has always actually had a strong playground provision, and we also know that play occurs at other council facilities, including non-profit and private enterprises as well. However, it's also now well known that play can happen anywhere that children have time, space and permission to do so. And the 2021 Play in Southland report by Active Southland recommended the importance of exploring play beyond playgrounds for the community. And this requires a strategic council-wide and indeed city-wide approach to play provision. The strategy will also set the guiding principles necessary for the quality delivery of the Urban Play Project and will respond to and align with national government agent guidelines, strategies and policies as identified in Attachment 1 that all points to the importance of play. Work over recent years by ICC and Active Southland has built a great foundation to develop this strategy and begin delivering play in a more holistic manner that better meets community need. Thank you, and happy to answer respond to any
So
questions.
3 questions. I'll ask the first one, Damien. Your comment right at the beginning was that play was under threat nationally. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, that isn't exactly what you said, but that was the sense of it. Do you want to fill that out a little bit, what you mean by that?
Yeah, so that data that Sport New Zealand speak to talk about sort of changing societal trends that impact on the way that children experience play today compared to how they used to experience it. So changing access to technology and time spent on those technologies, changing and at times often more stringent approaches to health and safety that may not always be necessary, changing parenting trends. There are changes to built infrastructure and provision of certain types of facilities and access to green space and other areas for play. So those are some of the things that they identify as impacting on children's experiences now that they may not have actually experienced when we were children.
Do we have any sense, sorry, the second question, that's a national, I suspect, worldwide trend. But do we have any data on the situation in Invercargill or Southland?
So the 2021 Southland Play in Southland report that I referred to talks to some of that data. It probably doesn't present it in the same way that Sport New Zealand is talking about it, but the need for play in different ways and different capacities certainly comes through quite strongly from that report.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Damien? So Grant, you're...
Yeah, it feels a bit like a nanny state, to be fair. But what I'm interested in is, I think at a previous council meeting, I asked around the funding for this role, and I understand that your role is funded directly from central government. But from here, where do we go? In terms of, and it's maybe not a question for yourself, it's for one of the officers. So, is all the work that you will do fully funded by central government, or do we have to allow some OPEX to fund this role once now that you're in the position?
Well, I guess I can't speak to the duration of my role as fixed term for 2 years from funding from Sport New Zealand.
Yeah.
It's up to council whether that continues. The point, I guess a key point of my work is not about creating a whole lot of new projects, but rather how does play form a component of existing work? How does play actually form an outcome of existing things that already occur?
Yeah, so secondary sort of point then, back to my point around, is that the council's role? Isn't that parents' role and caregivers' role? I mean, we have parks and we're abundance of parks. In another paper, there's so many spaces that we've got in Invercargill. We're abounding with opportunities for people to play. Why is it the council's role to get involved in a role that should be taken up by the caregivers and the parents?
My response would be that parents certainly have a role, undeniably, and that's included within the things that Sport New Zealand were talking about.
Don't they have a responsibility?
Yes, but also council does as well in our response to the 4 Wellbeings. Play is a component in all of that, and that's within the Local Government Act. The other component is that play, what would I call it? Community, I guess, whether that's scholars, advocates, researchers, etc., identify that for a child to have a quality play experience, they need the time, the space, and the permission to do those activities. And parents play a component of that, but also local government does as well in terms of what permissions are given to the public to use spaces in certain ways, as well as most of the space is owned and managed by council.
Yeah, so isn't that, haven't you just clarified what our role is? It's just to provide the space? And so and
the right permissions. And so the data is saying that at this stage local government is not providing in the way that the community needs.
I think actually, sorry to cut across you, but it also goes to my question that rather than generalisations about the nation or even about the world, which, the more that we can localise it so that we're actually getting, data and recommendations that are based on the actual situation on the ground here. Anyway, who have I got next? Panya.
I actually just touching on what Councillor Dewey just said, because I agree with
with a lot of what you said.
You've made a good start.
I do, but the other thing is I know we've got, you talked about libraries, Special Palace and schools and all those other things, and I was thinking there is no shortage of green space in this part of the country at all. Like literally, we are very fortunate. I'm just wondering, are you looking more about how to bring those other individual type play pieces like schools and all that together, or I was just trying to get a bit more, because I do have to say, it's really up to families and whānau and how they engage and play, which is not council's responsibility, but open to any ideas and solutions.
Yeah, so the strategy, we haven't predetermined what the outcomes of that strategy might look like, but certainly acknowledging there hasn't been a citywide approach to play, and there are individuals and separated groups that provide different opportunities that haven't considered their overlaps. And so local government, I believe, has a role in potentially bringing those things together in a more strategic and targeted approach that meets community need. Yeah, I'm new to Invercargill, but certainly there is an abundance of green space here, but access to that green space is at times limited. I've been data shared with me that there are people in South City who have never been to Queen's Park, and that's not purely based on choice.
Okay,
and so
we'll keep going, because I think everybody's wants to ask a question of you, so we'll keep going. Evelyn, you're next.
Yes, I think I was wondering whether some of the pressure is coming from things like the push to intensify the use of land, so smaller allotments, houses taking up most of the space, less outdoor space and people's personal properties to play, as opposed to when I was a child where you could not only play on your section but you could play on the street. That we've changed the dynamics by making sections smaller. Council plays a part in that. Is that part of what you're trying to draw to our attention, that these are the parts that council play in?
Absolutely.
Or potentially may play.
Yep.
Yeah.
Width of roads, speeds on roads, crossing times for children to play independently and move through their neighbourhoods. They need to be able to do that safely and easily, and at times independently of their parents. And if those spaces aren't safe for them to do so, then they're unlikely to do that. And if you don't have a car, then you won't be driving them to a playground.
And just a follow-up, whilst we have a lot of green space, there's also some pressure on us to have less. But are there places that you can see that we have a poverty of green space, so therefore the opportunities for people in some places is less than in others?
Yes, yeah, correct. But it's very expensive to create new green space, and so that's where having a council and citywide approach to figuring out actually where can play occur beyond what we've traditionally understood as prescribed zones of activity, usually on reserve land.
Thank you.
Ria, you're next.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Puddle, for bringing through your recommendations. I also, just touching on what other councillors have said, play in New Zealand is under threat, but I'd like to suggest also that family life in New Zealand is well and truly under threat in terms of what families, aka through our children, can and can't have access to as well. And I get what you're saying here, Ngāpu Aroha, our city with heart, we have to provide services for our community in order for our community to get ahead and I guess take part in these areas of concern that come up through different government agencies. My question to you though is, there are multiple issues in every community, in every country that we are facing, even globally, with things like crime, parents not able to trust the community that they live in to leave their kids at the park to play there, safety. We have so many variables of concerns that how does this report identify those concerns, and how can we as a council look at areas that are relevant to us under the Local Government Act in order to have our play not under threat for our children? So how do we balance that up? Because we can only do so much.
I think that's probably a rhetorical question. Actually, they're difficult for you to answer that question. So I'm going to take Alex's question next. Alex, it's you.
Honestly, I've got to say I'm a little bit disappointed in some of the comments that have been bouncing around the table. Some of the comments are like, "Our traditional role is just pipes and playgrounds." Like, you need to consider that this is far wider societal well-being and health outcomes for families. If we can strategically look at the fact that it's not just parks and playgrounds and reserves, and have an overarching strategy of actually the participation, the access. It's like saying, okay, we've got a playground, but we won't put any accessible equipment in it because, families should be responsible for picking up their children and the children's wheelchair and putting them on the swing and pushing them on the swing. It's the same level of accessibility that should be available for all families to come and enjoy our parks, playgrounds. But not only that, would be like saying we should scrap all the children's activities that we've got at the library that's for play participation. Like, it's so much, the outcomes of play is so much wider than just facilitating physical infrastructure. It's the health outcomes and the community outcomes that we have by investing in this is just so significant. I'm really struggling to understand how this isn't seen as to be such a fantastic step forward for us. And I really, I'm excited that we've got the role, and I'm excited to see Dr. Damien Puddle.
So it's good debate, actually, so we'll keep going with that. So Trish, you're next.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You talk about permission to use the spaces. Are you looking to use the other places in an innovative way so that children have more opportunities to play differently?
Yes, but I guess the premise of the play strategy that is a given is looking at play beyond parks and playgrounds. It's yet to be determined what that looks like, what those outcomes look like. But in the 3 years of my work in play advocacy for Hamilton City Council, that was absolutely what we were exploring.
So you would be, excuse me a second one, you'd be looking for places, permission from the council to have play operating in unusual places?
Potentially.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take one more question, Barry.
Yeah, what do you think you're going to be able to achieve in the 2 years, like the three things that you talked about? What do you actually want to achieve in this first 2 years?
The big thing for this year is certainly the play strategy itself. The second is kicking off the urban play project. And then the third thing really is bringing attention to what it is that we're talking about in regards to what does it mean to do play beyond playgrounds and parks, because it's not well understood. And so my role will be to help support all of council and all relevant staff to understand what that means in their context of work and influence.
Okay, I said that was the last question, Barry, but I'm going to take Leslie because I think she put her hand up just at a right moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that mine is so much of a question as in some ways a comment. I've also listened to some of the comments around the table, and I found some of them quite interesting from councillors who were very keen that we incorporated so many playful elements in our streetscape development in Eskindon Street. And because I've heard so many good comments back about those playful elements that we took a very conscious decision to incorporate, I suppose I was a bit surprised to hear a little bit of pushback about the play strategy development. And it's not so much a question, but my feeling is that it's a discussion that we would probably progress better in mid-year when we actually have the further paper in front of us. Yep. What we've got today is very much an introduction, and yeah, so it's not so much a question as a just saying I think we can have a lot more discussion when we've got something more developed in the play strategy. But look, if we can bring together some of the elements that we sort of tried to incorporate as playful extras in the streetscape development into a more holistic plan, I'm pretty much all for this going ahead.
Yeah. Well, certainly for a committee which is called the Community Wellbeing Committee, it seems like a pretty reasonable thing to be discussing. Look, Damien, this is just about the most I've seen in terms of contribution from councillors. I know not everybody's standing up and cheering, but everybody's interested in the subject. I think when we see the next report, which presumably it will start to get more into the nitty gritty, here are some things that you could do, council. It will become more real for us, because you get that sort of continuum between sort of do nothing or build it and they'll come, but just build it and they'll come. And then you've got, I think, your area work, which is more about, well, you need to do a lot more than that, actually, council, to encourage people to come and to make sure that they can come, and, you know, those sorts of questions. So I'm really interested in your recommendations. I mean, what I would encourage you to do, given, you know, money's always limited, is to make sure that it's obvious in your report what your key recommendations are. You know, if you can get it to sort of 2 or 3 or 4 key recommendations, there might be, you know, 20 sub-recommendations, I don't mind that, but if you can get 2 or 3 or 4 high-level recommendations, you say, this is going to make a difference, then it's more likely actually to, you know, not only get support of council, but actually get some money from council to do it. So thanks very much for your report. Appreciate it. So we are asked to receive the report. Will somebody move that we receive the report? Thank you, Leslie. Seconded, Trish. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Okay. So that takes us to the Southland Spaces and Places strategy, which is an update on the 2021 strategy, isn't it?
Mr. Chair, when we received the report, did we incorporate the other 2 recommendations? Because I'm happy to.
Okay, yes, so you're moving that we incorporate all 3?
Yes.
Okay, and Trish, are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I'll ask again, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thanks, Leslie. So that takes us to the Southland Regional Spaces and Places strategy. Rex, is somebody going to present this?
Yeah, on behalf of Caroline and Chris, I'll speak to this. They're both on leave. And as the report, take it as read. And really it's an update of a process that has been taking place at an officer level over the last 18 months or so across multiple agencies, including community funders as well as local authorities. You'll see from the recommendations in the report, it is really now endorsing the guiding principle. We're asking for an endorsement of the guiding principles and supporting of the development for the next sports field management plan to occur this calendar year, and adopting this and committing to implementing it as part of our work programs. And some of the questions I've been asked previously have been around the implementation of it, and I can assure you that the Parks and Recreation staff have incorporated this as it stands into their activity management plans and normal or business as usual work programs as much as possible going forward. So it's really just seeking that endorsement and adoption as per those recommendations.
We'll go to questions, and Rex, I'll ask one first. What I found difficult with this paper was to be able to identify what the changes were since 2021. You know, it's not presented in that sort of way where you can see what those are. And that made it actually quite difficult to, because the 2021 paper was obviously approved by council. We've been asked to approve an update, but when you read it, it's not obvious what the update is. So can you at least comment on, I don't want to stop the process by making that comment, but can you at least comment on how much change there is in that? Yeah.
I'd have to go back and refer back to the 2021 strategy, but it was really a full review. So it was really start with a clean sheet, which is what Richard Lindsay Consultancy, who were engaged to do the work, was undertaking.
So is that appropriate then, rather than to see it as an update, is to see it as a new document, basically?
Well, it's adopting the Southern Regional Spaces and Places Strategy 2023. Is it? Yeah.
Okay. So questions to Rex? Okay, Evelyn.
First of all, just me being nitpicky, under the purpose and summary, it would be really helpful if the macrons were there as they are in the attached document, so above the A's and Ngā and Wāhi, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. I'm perhaps assuming and I'm hoping I'm assuming correctly, that this is taking our strategy and the Southland wide strategy and making them talk to each other. I looked at the attachment, and the first thing that I saw was Wakaama out on the estuary, and thought, this is speaking to me as not just traditional images of Southland places and spaces. It's not a powerboat and it's not a rugby field, and I'm really quite, or a jet ski, I'm quite excited. This is the kind of activities, I think, even that we were talking about and looking at different play strategies. These are the things that our people could be doing at relatively low cost and quite close to home. But we don't talk about it enough, and we don't encourage it enough, I don't believe. But anyway, that's my soapbox. Have I brought it together? We approved our plan for the city. This is the Southland wide, bringing all the playing fields, all the rationalisations, all those conversations together. And if I've worked it out right, then I'm absolutely excited about this, because I think it must have taken quite a bit of effort on a lot of people's part to make the different organisations talk to one another and bring it all together. So thank you for that. I congratulate Mr. Lindsay.
Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Question and a comment referring to page 6 of the paper 137, and the reference around, and but to what Evelyn's talked about around bringing the region together and how we provide for sports. Historically, we haven't played that well together, so I'd be interested in how we're going to be different in the future. And then page 153 in the appendix, the demographic breakdown gives me quite a bit of concern, because we've just previously had a presentation around play, but who pays? And if you look at the trajectory of that breakdown of where we're heading demographically, we're going to have a whole lot of old age people who don't have a lot of income, as we know. How's our community going to survive? And so I think there's a really strategic issue we need to lean into around economic development, so we do get, you know, the 30-somethings coming to town and having kids all staying, so that we can have houses that we can charge rates to, we can fund all this stuff. But if you look at that demographic breakdown, we're going to have a whole lot of old age pensioners who are going to be tight for cash and living from the government, in a lot of instances that can't afford all the stuff that we're clocking up. So I think we need to take account of that this year, particularly as we roll out all sorts of different things around our priorities, and economic development has to be a key part of how we do anything.
I mean, it's got all sorts of implications, isn't it? It's kind of different subject than we're talking about, but just listening to what you say, there's no point in having economic development based on labour-intensive industries, because we're not going to have the labour to satisfy them. I mean, that's the reality. And you know, and that really means that when we do look at economic development, we really do want to be pushing the high-tech stuff that's got, you know, high productivity, but don't necessarily need a whole lot of grant labour, because they're just not going to be there, or people are not going to be willing to do it. Alex, you're next. Yeah.
Grant, you've actually hit the nail on the head, and that this, and the first instance of this was actually put together and consolidating all of the available partners, so that the strategy can actually inform everybody who pays for anything in the city, including funders, Sports New Zealand, Active Southland, ILT, the Trust, like literally anybody who ever pays for any kind of sporting or recreation facilities, any spaces and places, to be able to understand and have an informing framework to understand where that investment should be best spent going forward. So everybody is, you know, talking to each other. They've all set the boundaries. They've all set the principles, and then we can then, and us as, I guess, the sports fields strategy is a really good example of that, because we've got 53 sports fields. How do we know which ones are going to be the most important ones if we don't develop a strategy? How are we going to know in future, as you say, we've got aging demographics, how are we going to know where our best ratepayer dollar is spent and on which fields? It's so
Ratepayer dollars.
Tax ratepayer
Well,
dollars.
who pays the tax though, Rob? This is the whole point.
Sorry?
How does the government pay for it? They pay for it through tax. But if you've
Yeah.
got a whole lot of people that aren't working and are taking from the tax, they're not creating economic development, are they?
You
There's
pay
no
tax
tax
if
to
you're
be
not working.
taxed.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. You're right, but this what we are talking about right now is the spaces in
Well,
place strategy.
it's the horse and cart theory, right? We've got to get the horse in front of the cart, and the horse is the economic development.
But the cart is currently carrying stuff.
So look,
regardless.
we're getting a bit of a cross-table debate going here, which is
we've still got the cart.
It's only
and
January.
The horse.
so we're at the questions to Rex stage.
Sorry, yeah. Rex, I would be interested in my question, sort of how we bring everyone together, because you're well versed in this stuff.
So Active Southland was the one that brought everybody together, and then based on all of the data and based on all of the working groups and everything, formed the Spaces in Places strategy with the consultant.
Yeah, but actually, how are we physically going to play together when we say, okay, Southland District Council, fund the stadium more because it's a regional asset?
They'll get to play there.
That gets my vote.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think there's any other questions. I do have one for you though, Rex, which the two cultural advisors, Victor and Cheryl, who I'm embarrassed to say I don't know, did they come by recommendation of Manifeno, or where was that the process? I'm sure you know, Evelyn.
So the late Victor Manawatu actually worked for Waipapai Renaka at the time in
Right.
our social services. And Cheryl Hinari currently, I think, works for DIA, but I'm not sure on what basis she was a member of this panel. But I do know both the people, if that's the
They
answer.
were invited through normal channels.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no other questions, then we'll go back to the recommendations.
I'm happy to move all 6 recommendations, Chair.
Say that again, sorry.
I'm happy to move all 6 recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
And I'm happy for
happy
you
to
to do that
second
if I can find them. Okay. I've got
Happy to
them.
second
Okay.
all 6.
So,
As is.
Happy
will
to-
someone second that recommendation?
Happy to do
Thank
that.
you, Leslie. Is there any more discussion? So all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can go back to Councillor Dermody and answer your questions outside of the meeting.
Yeah, sweet as, yeah.
You know, I mean, really important discussion. Probably this just isn't quite the right place to have it.
Got to have it
This
sensible.
meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, that takes us to the Donovan Park Master Plan update on page 189. And again, I guess, Rex, you're going to have to be it, aren't you?
Cassie's going to.
Oh, Cassie's here.
Surprise.
Hi.
Kia ora everyone. Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to readdress where we're at following the information gathering exercise since it was endorsed to start moving forward last year. We have put together emerging themes based on what we've been hearing from the community, what we've been seeing through the strategies and policies that are currently out there, as well as looking and doing that due diligence with what infrastructure's out there, the GIS mapping and those bits and pieces to try and paint that picture for ourselves before we start forming the draft master plan. We'd like to incorporate the emerging themes into the LTP consultation, just to be able to test it with the community and get any comments or feedback before we then form the draft master plan, which would go back to council for consideration and put that forward then to consult again with the public for stage 1 of the management plan when that's approved. So that's the key points I wanted to address. Does anyone have any questions?
I have one. Where Michael gathers other names for other questions, but I have one. So I promise there's a question at the end of this, Cassie, right? So a little speech at the beginning. So I go to Donovan Park regularly with my dog. And by the way, I like the geese and the ducks. I mean, I would man the barricades to protect Donovan Park. But what I think of a Donovan Park, and I suspect what most people think of as Donovan Park, is the area with the pond and that you walk through with the toilets and, you know, you go up through there. But that would be less than a third, I think, of the area of the park, wouldn't it? The
Correct.
79 hectares is mainly made up of the farm. The farm owned by the city and operated by the city just to keep the grass short. We run sheep on it, I think you'd be right in saying. So my question is about how, when we go and ask people about the future of Donovan Park and their vision for that, how they get the context to the question. So just taking that a little further. So if I went to a group and said, how do you feel about using a part of Donovan Park for commercial purposes, then I would expect that maybe everybody would say no, right? If on the other hand, I go to a group and I say, the city population is increasing significantly, disproportionately as older people. Within a few years, there'll be at least 1,000 more over 70s in Invercargill than there are at the moment. At the moment, there's no place for them to live. You know, we're considering Donovan Park, part of Donovan, the western end of Donovan Park, which is terra incognita as far as people, nobody's ever seen it, right? The western end of Donovan Park, we're considering that as maybe a suitable site to put maybe a retirement village or something of that sort that would house maybe 500. If it was 30 hectares, it would house about 500 people of the 1,000 increasing. And if you put it like that, suddenly the group that says, well, I'm against it, you know, suddenly people, I think far more people say, well, actually that says that better to have elderly housing than sheep grazing, right? I think a lot of people would feel that way. So getting back to my question is about when we go to groups and speak to them, whether we are explaining the context in that sort of way. The other question I would ask, and it's part of the same question, is whether, given that context, when we do go and talk to groups, do we talk to people like Age Concern, Grey Power, you know, those sorts of people that are going to have that context rather than, you know, the equestrian group or the, you know, PowerNet who want to use it for the, you know, for the training. And if I take the PowerNet one because it's one that I can speak to personally, any paddock will do. We're surrounded by paddocks. There's 1,000 places and around Invercargill they could do that work. PowerNet could do that work. There's no strategic at all from their point of view. So anyway, coming back to the question, which is really about how do we make sure that people, in answering the question, have the context that allows them to give an informed answer.
Cool.
I told you there was a speech attached.
No, and two questions, I think. Yeah. So how do we put the message across to get that feedback? So we had a mixed range of engagement to get the feedback through. Are you specifically wanting to know about disposal though? Because we wanted to make sure that when we went out with regards to finding out what people wanted for the future of the park, we tried to make those questions as broad as possible while also noting that there is an area for potential alternative land use, which wasn't to be defined straight away, but through conversations with the community, we've been able to flesh that out, that this is a space that that council is interested in for a variety of uses that could include that. So from a Parks and Rec perspective, we follow the Reserves Act to get as far as the removing reserve status over a piece that we would see as surplus, and then down the track it would then be how council would like to use that land in the future, whether it be for anything.
I do notice that there's only 12% of respondents who are dead against the idea of building anything there, but again, I don't want to repeat myself. It's just about making sure people have the context so that they can respond appropriately. Trish, are you on the... Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'll get Leslie first.
Thank you. Casey, my question's a little bit more detailed, so I'll refer to page 196 of our agenda. So it's under the maximising activation of Donovan Park land. So I'll read it out to you because it might make it simpler. In the initial parks land disposal options paper, 37 hectares of land was proposed for reconsideration towards revocation of the reserve status under the Act. Later in that paragraph it says when considering this reorganisation of land, there is a potential for 5 to 10 hectares of the park to be considered for alternative land use. So just for my clarity, are we going to propose or put out a much lesser parcel than the original intention? So originally we were looking at 37 hectares for the reserve status to potentially be revoked. Are we now at the stage where we're saying, oh, from this feedback it's only 5 to 10 hectares that we would look at proposing revocation on? Or are we still saying it's debatable? I'm just not absolutely clear. Have we greatly reduced the hectares we originally talked about?
What we've been hearing and seeing is that there are a lot more the ideas that have been coming through for use of Donovan Park is taking up a lot of that space that would have been alternative land use. Things like events and that sort of stuff are coming through a lot stronger. There is still appetite for an area of land. It might not be as large as what we originally anticipated, purely because of this master plan process. We've been able to identify other ideas that have been coming through from the community that they would like to use this space for.
Further to Leslie's question, I thought when I read that part that I was a little bit concerned that there was an element of predetermination in that. We're quoting numbers for how much might be available. We're just about to go to public submission in the long-term plan. So I think we have to be a bit careful. Yep. I think the other thing that we have to be careful of is that if the amount of land is subscale, it may be simply impossible to do anything very much with it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Leslie, you again. You wanted to?
Thank you. Well, it was just supplementary, Mr. Chair, and because of Casey's answer, it's probably a suggestion to the committee that that's a very significant hectare reduction that we might want to workshop quite intensively as a council, because that is a remarkably different place than we have talked about in the last workshops we had on the point. And it just seems to me, if we're talking about a maximum of 10 hectares where we were looking previously at 37, that's a
I agree. And it goes again, it's a matter of who determines the priorities, to what extent. So who's accountable for thinking about the number of elderly people, where they're going to live?
That's why I'm
in 10 years'
time. We need to workshop.
Is that us,
Mr. Chair? It's a dramatically different size of space that we're talking about, and the earlier discussion was looking at something quite different from this feedback, which changes the picture significantly. Quite substantially.
So I think that's a really good idea, Leslie. Do we need a resolution on that, or can management just nod to that? And we've got a nod. Sorry, Michael.
Through yourself, Chair, I'd just like to reverse that statement if Council can, just in looking at that and say, basically as part of this process, you have identified there's a need from the community for somewhere between 27 to 32 hectares to perform the services that they currently perform on that site, or desire to perform on that particular site. Council will need to consider the need of the community in relation to that, and whether there's another place that could be serviced as well as part of that equation. So that would need to come forward as part of that, as a discussion point to Council. It's not necessarily saying that it's not 37, or Council could decide yes, they do want to allocate that, and you end up with 10 hectares available. But from my perspective, that has not come through to Council yet in relation to it. The community's voiced their need and requirement as part of that process, and Council will need to go through that, how they do or don't service that need.
So, Michael, are you agreeing with Leslie that it's appropriate to workshop it through Council?
I will look to my Parks team in relation to that, and from a findings perspective, but I think that is something they'll need to consider. Whether it's a workshop or whether it's a report, I'll need to look for their guidance in relation to how they want to approach that.
through you, Mr. Chair, this is the start of a process, or that has already started, but we're still very much in the early stages of it. And part of the next development phase includes consultation with a link to the LTP, which is incorporated in there. Subsequent to that, there will be further engagement that will need to come back, as Councillor Soper says, to discuss around that with the council before we get the final draft, which is proposed to go out for consideration in March, April. Yeah. So there's a lot of work to still happen in that engagement development even. I mean, that's just initial response to some of that very early feedback. But yeah, the council will be brought in as part of those conversations all the way through.
Okay.
And whether it's, I think probably a good workshop, it will be a good workshop topic in that March, April period.
Because it does have to, there is a need, isn't there, to balance the need and the priority of different things, some of which are actually nothing to do with play, I'm using that word, or nothing to do with amenity. You know, something like the need to provide housing for elderly people given the change in the demographics and the change in the population. You know, how does that come in? How does that get considered? So I think, okay, there's work which council officers have to do, but I think it would be really good to bring that back here at some point for ideally a workshop, I think. Okay, I have Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think really good point you've made there, Leslie, and also I really endorse the comments you've made, Tom, around, you know, how we ask the question through this process is really, really important, because, you know, in my mind, it is a, well, trade-off's the word that's floating around in my head. I'm not sure that's the right word, but, you know, we have to make some compromises where, you know, if you look at the plan we're laying out in the long-term plan, you know, we need capital coming into the program to be able to provide some core services, and that's a reality. So I think that's really important about how we ask the question and how we inform the public, to Rodney's point, to make sure they fully understand the why. I think that's a really important piece of the process, and I'm a big fan of having a map, which I've made a point to Rex on. And then I think, Michael, you referenced 32 hectares. There's people there that think they need 32 hectares. I'd be interested in what activity that is that needs 32 hectares. It's a big area. So.
Can I just, through you, Mr. Chair, just reinforce that the purpose of this report is to really update you on the process and the progress. The debate and the discussion around what's in that master plan and how is over the next 3-month period.
I think though, sorry Rex, I think though that it does go to process. You know, the question I was asking about, you know, who gets consulted, you know, are they actually made aware of the logic behind it? Are we talking to people like, you know, age concern, grey power about the need for elderly housing? I mean, that, so it does go to process. It's not only about outcome.
Yeah, equally, sorry if I may, you know, I think we've got to be careful of statements around, on page 7 of 11, high level of public engagement. 200 out of 21,000 ratepayers, or 55,000 people. That's not a high level of engagement. You know, that's a small sample of the population sharing their view. So I think we've got to be cautious around that. And then the statement on page 9 of 11, or 197, a board box, around the future focus of focused economy delivering through innovation and partnership. I struggle to see how the statement under how the master plan will deliver that is economic, has an economic impact.
So leave it as a rhetorical question, Grant, and we'll keep going with the Trish. You were next.
Oh, my question really is just, I want us to be very clear that what everyone has said is what we actually want. I've heard that Donovan Park from many people, I don't know how many is, not what you've got obviously, but people don't understand what Donovan Park is. They think Donovan Park is what Tom described, and they don't know, and I think we're getting wrong information. We could be, getting wrong information about what they perceive as Donovan Park. So it's very important that they get the picture of why, but they also understand what part. And I think it might have been you, Tom, mentioned about the fact, is it viable in the part that we're left with? So they're really, really important questions if this is going to be an effective piece of consultation.
Thank you. Evelyn?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Cassie, on page 194 of books, which I'm not sure what page it is of your report, but it talks about highly productive land. And I'm harking back to what the chair said when he was talking about the sheep on the farm. It's only there to keep grass down. Now, it's a bit more than that. It's the obligation that we made when we bought the land off the Donovan whānau. But the importance to the city of this piece of land is becoming actually, in terms of the farm, is increasing in importance because we have only, I think, 3 urban farms left. And this might become the only one within a very short space of time. So where do city young people actually see livestock on a real working farm, on productive land, which is meant to be used for this purpose? So if we're going to put housing on class 2 land, what have we sacrificed? And what other opportunities? And sorry, but actually my mind did go back to play, because there seems to be a theme that's going through everything that's coming today, and that is that not everything is about hardened surfaces, not everything is about houses, even though I think housing is vitally important. Not everything is about infrastructure to make it easier to get to work. Some of it is about the quality of life we live in the city in which we live, and the experiences that we have as a community within this city. If we take away, for example, the opportunity for sheep to graze and for people to see them grazing, are we actually taking away an element of what actually is intrinsic to this country post-colonially, of how the land has been used and how people have interacted with that land? And are we actually taking away from the future citizens of this city an opportunity to see how this country, the economy of the post-1840 economy, actually grew? Because this is it in a nutshell within the city boundary. Now, I'm not saying that there may not be parts that may be considered to be surplus, but can I just say that when we first started talking about selling off Donovan Park, not that I was one that was selling Donovan Park, it wasn't elderly housing that we were talking about. It was housing for people who don't want to live south of Tweed Street. So let's be real about this. If elderly housing is what ends up on the portion that we have, that could very well be my optimum goal.
Yeah, can I say?
Yeah. So, I mean, Cassie, what is the implications for us if we take the urban farm out, if we take this highly productive land out, and we expand the city? Where is our city with heart?
Can we leave it as a rhetorical question?
We can.
But I mean, your point's very well made. I mean, the only comment I would make, Evelyn, was that I was involved right at the beginning of this with Nobby's Donovan Park emerged as a possible site, and I can assure you that certainly at the beginning, whether it drifted, I'm not sure, but certainly at the beginning it was elderly housing that was the target. I have Alex and then Rangi.
That's me. Hey, look, I was just going to say that I really do agree with your speech at the beginning there, Tom. I think what people's perception of Donovan Park is and what it actually is really quite disconnected. Another thing I guess I just wanted to talk about is that I know we've got a lot of plans and places and spaces and strategies and that underway, and obviously the Donovan Park Master Plan is one of those. But I think it's a really good example of how we've gone to, a substantial amount, not a lot, but a substantial amount of residents to ask them of what they think that piece that they know of Donovan Park, I guess. So I'm talking about, like, I guess the pond area and that kind of thing could be utilised, or like thinking outside of the box. What do they want to see for the future of that, right? And it doesn't always necessarily have to be expensive, which comes to the point that Grant made earlier, that we've got all of these plans and strategies, but how are we actually going to pay for them when we've got an ageing populace? And an example of that, and thinking outside of the box and seeing some new emerging trends that I'd really like to give that's not particularly expensive, is things like disc golf. We already had Queen's Park in the inner city. All we needed was a bunch of baskets, and we're looking at other places that we can put that, and that didn't cost us a lot to implement, but what it did was give permission for people to play in a different way. It's things that we've heard in the youth council engagement piece that we had with around this Donovan Park master plan. Heard somebody say, why don't they put in a wharf on the pond so that people can use their model boats? You know, like it's really low cost ideas out of the box that could actually just give people permission to play in a different way that adds to community heart and community well-being. It's those kinds of initiatives that me personally, I think I would love to see come out of that play strategy development in all sorts of places and spaces and playgrounds and whatever it is that we can facilitate right across the city. And yeah, I guess that's my 2 seconds of rant. I just really hope that we can see some of those outcomes that we've seen in this, and as this one's further along than the play strategy is, that I hope you can see some of those synchronicities.
Thank you, Alex. Rangi's last.
Thank you, Chair. Look, my questions around seeking clarity on the paragraph that talks about the conditions the Donovan family placed on the sale. Now, reading it, it just gets a bit wobbly in the sense that the request where they were not wanting encroachment of the city seems to be until the 1980s, and then it comments there's been an appropriate passing of time since then to develop a master plan. Now, I don't need an answer now, but is it possible that as elected members we can see the official documentation that records this request, that records the subsequent minutes, and for us to look at that and gain our own viewpoints, and maybe even seek peer review legal?
Yeah, I thought about that as well. Thanks, Rangi. Rex wants to.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Podger. It's exactly a request I've asked of the staff myself, to seek clarification and make sure we're watertight in what some of that information historically allows us or doesn't allow us. So I've asked for exactly that as well, and we'll share that back with the elected members.
So that exact information, I don't necessarily need a legal opinion, I just want to see the information.
Yep, same.
Yep, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Before well, I'm going to ask Steve actually to comment on this, because you've sat and listened very carefully, Steve. What's your thoughts?
I think 2 points around clarification on what we're asking and the feedback we're seeking back from the public is really important. I think there's a massive misunderstanding around Donovan Park, and I think without leading too much into those future plans, really clarifying in the consultation process what Donovan Park is. And I think who we're speaking to around those future possibilities is so key, because you can just completely miss it, and miss an opportunity here to get it right, you know, for the future of our community. And I think that's probably, in reading this, I was slightly concerned around the drop of hectares when reading the agenda as well, and getting clarification around that. That seemed quite black and white around, but I understand that we're just at the beginning of the process. But yeah, it's a really key piece that we're potentially working on here, and I think clarification on a few things is really important. But
yeah,
who we're speaking to and what Donovan Park is and those parameters, I think is key.
Thank you. So look, we've got 3 recommendations on page 189 that we received the report, that we confirm the key themes, and that we confirm that council officers will finalise the master plan. I don't know whether, do we need to add an action there to bring back those recommendations to workshop? Would that be appropriate, Leslie, to actually include that as a further recommendation?
It would be good to have it recorded, Mr. Chair, I think, because it is a significantly important step that I think all the councillors are saying is important to us.
Okay. So, I mean, I think the message is that councillors are extremely interested in this subject and would really like to be involved rather than simply see the end output. We want to be involved in the process and the way through. So if that can be recorded as another recommendation 4 or something, then we can do those. I've got Michael's furiously wordsmithing it as we speak.
Mr. Chair, logically, should it go before? Should 3 become 4 and yeah?
New 3, new 3 comes in.
Yep. I keep forgetting it's in front of me. I keep spinning around to look at it.
It's easier to read up here. Get him even.
Oh, that is, yeah. Bad type on that one.
Grandma. You can see me going.
So happy for comments.
No, just checking your spelling.
Any typos will be, of course, rectified.
Well, it was good to rectify that one
Can I
quickly.
just suggest it's not just about the use of the land, it's actually about the whole master plan.
Use of land and the master plan process.
So do you want to change the wording of 3 then, right? So you suggest right.
Master plan, yeah.
Master plan development.
Of the master plan process.
But it's also what we can do and what we can't do, depending on the Donovan whānau that stated, you know, what the use of that land is for. So for me, it's really important as well.
That would be included in a workshop.
Yeah.
That would.
What's his Randy's question?
Because I mean, we should remember that the decisions around this issue have got implications for the long-term plan. Because the LTP makes assumptions which have significant impact on rates in the outer years, based on the assumption that's been made so far. So it's a pretty critical decision that we make, and would have substantial impact on rates if we decided to reduce the land available to 5 hectares or something. Okay, have we got it up? Is everybody happy with the wording as it's there at the moment? Will somebody move all of those? Thanks, Trish. Would somebody second it? Thanks, Evelyn. Any further discussion? And if not, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so just before we do the activities report, we'll go back to the item 5 in the agenda, the minutes of the District Licensing Committee. Unfortunately, Dan hasn't been able to join us. He did warn me that he may not be able to get a Wi-Fi connection, so that's what's happened. So will somebody move that we receive those pro forma? Yep. Thank you, Leslie, and seconded by Evelyn. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So that takes us to the activities report, which is in whose name? The group managers, everybody. Who's going to present this one?
I suppose, Mr. Chair, we can take it as read and answer any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions? And Rex is going to be the recipient of those questions. So.
We, as in
Barry.
Seems to be a huge number of the parking complaints, gone up from 59 to 85. Just thinking, what is the reason for that?
Same as before.
Through you, Chair, this has been an ongoing trend over the year where we've noticed comparing the current month with the same month for the previous year that is a significant increase. The majority of this relates to RFS in the suburbs where essentially people are not happy with what they would consider to be abandoned vehicles in the suburbs, or people parking over driveways, over yellow lines, those sorts of things. And this is a continuing
So
theme.
can you just I mean, I think we asked this question at a previous meeting and I just forget the answer. So define parking complaint form. It's not a case of somebody complaining that they should not have got a ticket but were ticketed? No.
No, we call those parking disputes. So
Right.
that's where they've received an infringement and they're disputing that infringement. A parking complaint is where an RFS has been lodged where somebody is complaining about a potentially abandoned vehicle, where the vehicle might be parked, over a driveway, causing a safety issue, yellow lines, etc., and bus stops, those sorts of things. They sometimes result in an infringement.
Could I ask, and I hate asking this sort of question because I know it just increases exponentially the reports, but on a one-off basis, it'd be very useful maybe at the next Wellbeing Committee to actually see a breakdown of what those complaints are, just in a simple list. So for example, if it was 30 and 29 of them were vehicles abandoned at the beach, let's just suppose, I think that would tell a story in a way that maybe we don't quite get at the moment from the data. I mean, I say on a one-off basis, I'm not suggesting that we get, an ongoing report. That's okay. Any other questions? Grant first.
Yeah, just two. One with page 202, just with the limb reporting days slipping back from sort of an average around 5 to sort of 7 or 8, and that's a critical piece of engagement we have with lawyers and people in the town that are doing business. Is there any reason why that's gone back by 3 odd days?
I came in through that halfway because I was busy writing notes about the last comment. So that's to do with limbs.
Yeah. Why is it the days to get a limb gone back from 5 days to 8 days increased?
So it's more likely to be because we've actually stopped doing 5-day limbs. They were too difficult to service. Generally, we're around 5 days anyway to get them out.
But doesn't it say we're actually over that?
So yeah, I'd probably have to go and speak to the team to get a bit more information on that.
Yeah.
I do know that we've changed the 5-day limb service and removed
So
it.
I suppose my global question is, has our level of service delivery for limbs, is it dropping?
Not as far as I'm aware. It's actually increased over the course of 2023.
You'll assure us that it's not. And then 210 around pests and animals. On my daily morning walk with my dog, I see a heck of a lot of rabbits in Queen's Park, and I've thought about how I could rate them, but I can't. So I think they should be exterminated.
They probably think the same about you.
Yeah, they probably do. In fact, I've asked them and they have said that, Tom. So yeah, it is a concern, obviously, and we've just planted a lot of new young trees in there, and it'll be a waste of investment if we don't control the pests in there. And equally out at Fossbender Park, there's a bit of gorse in that creeping in some of those areas, and broom, and I just wonder what our plan around nipping in the bud. Any person that's dealt with gorse, and a lot of farmers will say it's a second mortgage if you let it get away. So it's probably easy to deal with it now as opposed to wait till it becomes a problem. So just interested in those 2 points.
Okay, so let those points lie. Thanks. Grant, you made the point. Ria.
I just seeking some clarification. I've got 2 questions, but the first one is about the car complaints, parking complaints. Would that include vehicles that have been in crashes and their vehicles half on the road and half off the road on council land, like in Gala Street recently? It was there for like weeks. The car crash. Sorry.
The police usually deal with those, although we do sometimes end up receiving complaints about them. We follow those up with the owner if we can identify the owner details from the vehicle. Often it's a situation where they are waiting for their insurance company to remove the vehicle. If it takes longer, that can usually mean that there's maybe not insurance involved or there's other difficulties, but it is up to the owner to organise the vehicle to be removed.
So we're quite happy for that vehicle or other vehicles to remain on council land for up to what time? Is there like a...
If we can't identify the owner, then it will be, there's a stickering process, but I can't recall the full details to be able to explain that, sorry.
No, that's okay. I'd noted that recently. I'd seen that happen on a few occasions over the last few months, and I thought maybe it came underneath that. But my other question, I'm not sure if it's to you, but it's to the Parks team, bringing up what Grant's talking about. I too go through Queen's Park every day, have noticed the rabbits in there. Wonder if the accumulation of more baby rabbits and being in there is the fact that there's so many trees that are felled and sitting there that you see all the rabbits congregating in there. But I'm wondering, like, do we have a time frame of when those trees that have fallen down? I know we've asked this question before of Queen's Park with the trees that fall over through hazards and through the Queen's Park team. But having been there and seeing all the potential hazards in the park with the trees for children, surely we're going to get those trees up quicker, are we not?
Well, with Caroline not here, I don't know if we can get any comment on it, but it's unfortunately there's nobody.
Is it a question that we could put forward and get an answer back through?
Yeah,
I suspect it will become a health and safety problem.
Well, you can take that away, Rex, can't you? And you can respond. I mean, I think it'd be useful to respond.
Can I suggest you just flick me an email?
Yeah, sure. Now?
Are there any other questions on the activities report? I don't have any other names, so will somebody move that we receive the report? Thanks, Leslie, and seconded by Alex. Any other discussion? Those in favour say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. And I think that disposes of all of the business of the meeting.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
So we'll close the meeting at that point, and thank you to everybody who joined us in live stream. And good night to you. Cheers.